I had kind of a rough childhood and I don't really talk about it often. Growing up my mother slept around, so she always had different guys around, and it goes without saying she didn't have great taste in men. Although my mother Christina never physically abandoned me, I always felt emotionally abandoned by her. And as if she chose herself and other men over me. My father left us when I was 17, so growing up I used to live with my stepmother Ruth. I never knew my father and I was okay with that. I didn't wonder what it was like to have a father or envy children who had one. You can't miss what you never had. On top of that, the only adult males in my life were typically there for a very short period and were abusive in one way or another, so I didn't really have high opinions of dads to begin with. When I was 20 he wanted to meet me. At first I was apprehensive since my stepmother had only ever told me horror stories about how he had abused her and other women, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to meet him. However, I agreed. When we met things went really well and our relationship really took off from there. I don't know what I was expecting, but my father Matthew was smart, charming, and very charismatic. Nothing like what I expected. He spoke with a gentle confidence that instantly made me feel at ease, and his eyes, warm and attentive, actually seemed to see me, not through me, not past me, but really see me. I've missed so much of your life, he said. During that first meeting, a coffee shop downtown, where the smell of fresh grounds and pastries created an intimate bubble around us. I know I can't make up for lost time, but I'd like to be part of your life now if you'll let me. I nodded, surprised at the lack of resentment. I felt something about his sincerity disarmed me. I'd like that too, I replied, and meant it. In the weeks that followed, I found myself spending more time with Matthew, learning about the man Ruth had painted as a monster. The disconnect was jarring. Where were the 6 tendencies she described? The manipulation, the cruelty. One evening as I returned home to the apartment I shared with Ruth, I found her waiting by the window. Her silhouette, backlit by the setting sun, looked almost ethereal, beautiful in a way that made my heart skip. Despite myself. You were with him again, she said, not a question but an accusation. He's not what you said he was, I countered, dropping my bag on the couch. A kind Ruth, thoughtful. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides, her face inches from mine. You don't know him like I do. The charming face he shows you, it's a mask. But even as she spoke I couldn't help noticing how her breath hitched when she got close to me, how her eyes darted to my lips. For the briefest second the air between us grew thick with something unspoken, something that had been building for months. Ruth had always been a constant in my life, the one who bandaged my scraped knees when Christina was too busy, the one who remembered my birthday when Christina forgot, the one who held me through nightmares and celebrated my small victories. I'd never allowed myself to acknowledge the warmth that spread through me whenever she was near. I worry about you, she whispered, her hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from my face. The touch lingered, her fingertips grazing my cheek. I couldn't bear it. If he hurt you. Something in her touch broke a dam inside me. Before I could think better of it, I leaned forward and pressed my lips against hers. For a heart-stopping moment she froze, and I feared I'd made a terrible mistake. Then with a soft sound that was half surrender and half relief, she kissed me back. Her lips were soft, tentative at first, then more insist, and her hands found my waist, drawing me closer until I could feel the rapid beat of her heart against my own. The world narrowed to this moment, to the taste of her, to the warmth of her body against mine. When we finally broke apart, breathless, she rested her forehead against mine. We shouldn't, she murmured, but made no move to step away. Why not, I asked, my voice barely audible. It's complicated, she said. You don't understand the full picture. I didn't care about complications or pictures in that moment. All I knew was that Ruth, the woman who had been more of a mother to me than Christina ever was, had awakened something in me that felt dangerously right. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen kisses and whispered conversations. Ruth would pull away, sometimes guilt clouding her features, but she always came back to me. There was an urgency to her touch, as if she was racing against time or fate itself. Tell me about your marriage, I asked one night as we lay tangled in sheets, the moonlight casting shadows across her bare shoulders. To Matthew, was it really as bad as you said? A shadow crossed her face. Worse, she said after a long pause, but it's in the past. Then why do you still wear his ring? I'd noticed she never took it off even during our most intimate moments. Some chains are harder to break than others, she replied cryptically, turning away from me. I didn't press further that night, but questions began to form in my mind, little inconsistencies in her stories, strange reactions when I mentioned my growing relationship with Matthew, the way she sometimes stared off into space when she thought I wasn't looking, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. One afternoon I decided to surprise Ruth at home. I'd finished classes early and thought we might spend the afternoon together. What I didn't expect was to find Christina's car in our driveway. I let myself in, quietly hearing voices from the kitchen, Ruth and Christina speaking in hushed but heated tones. She's getting too close to Matthew, Christina hissed. This wasn't part of the plan. What did you expect? Ruth replied, you're the one who told her all those lies about him being abusive. Of course she'd want to see for herself. Fix it, Christina snapped, or everything we've worked for falls apart. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. What plan? What lies? Before I could process what I'd overheard, the kitchen door swung open and Christina emerged. She startled upon seeing me, eyes widening fractionally before her face settled into its usual mask of indifference. "Linda," she said, voice syrupy with fake warmth. What a surprise. Behind her, Ruth appeared, her face pale. "You're home early," she said, and I could hear the fear beneath her casual tone. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. "What plan were you talking about?" Christina laughed, too bright, too brittle. "Just some charity event Ruth is helping me with. Nothing that would interest you, dear." But I could see it in their eyes. They were hiding something big, and it had to do with me and my father. That night Ruth tried to distract me with kisses and sweet words, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. When she finally fell asleep, I carefully slipped out of bed and made my way to her home office. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, some clue, some explanation for the strange conversation I'd overheard. I sifted through papers and drawers, finding nothing out of the ordinary, until I spotted a small lockbox tucked behind some medical journals on her bookshelf. My heart raced as I pulled it down. It was locked, of course, but I remembered the combination Ruth used for everything. My birthday. The irony wasn't lost on me as the box clicked open. Inside were documents, medical records, letters, and photographs. One caught my eye immediately, a picture of a man who looked startlingly like me standing next to a younger Christina. On the back, written in faded ink, "Paul and Christina. Summer 99. Paul, I'd never heard that name before. Who was he, and why did he look so much like me? As I dug deeper, I found what appeared to be falsified medical records, paternity tests with Matthew's name clearly edited, birth certificates with inconsistent details. My hands trembled as the pieces started to form a disturbing picture. Matthew wasn't my father. The realization hit me like a physical blow. If Matthew wasn't my father, then who was, and why had Ruth and Christina gone to such lengths to hide the truth? Before I could look further, I heard Ruth's footsteps in the hallway. I quickly replaced everything and slipped back to bed, my mind racing with questions that threatened to consume me. The next morning, I couldn't look Ruth in the eye. Every touch, every kiss now felt tainted by whatever secret she was keeping from me. I made an excuse about needing to study and left the house, but instead of heading to campus, I drove straight to Matthew's place. He greeted me with a smile that faltered. When he saw my expression, "What's wrong?" he asked, ushering me inside. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I need you to tell me the truth. Are you my biological father?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Matthew's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, then a dawning realization that seemed to age him before my eyes. "Who told you to ask me that?" he said finally, his voice hoarse. "No one," I replied. "I found some things. Documents that suggest the paternity test was falsified." He sank into a chair, running a hand over his face. "I always suspected," he admitted after a long silence, "Christina was unfaithful, but by the time I had real doubts, I'd already fallen in love with you, with being your father. I didn't want to know if it wasn't true." "Do you know who my real father might be?" I asked, thinking of the photograph I'd found. A shadow crossed his face. "She had an affair with my brother Paul, but he died heart attack before you were born." "Paul, the man in the photograph, the man who looked like me." "I need to go," I said abruptly, rising to my feet. My head was spinning with revelations, with betrayals layered upon betrayals. As I drove home, my thoughts churned. Ruth had lied to me about Matthew, about my parentage, possibly about everything. And yet, despite the deception, I couldn't ignore the genuine connection I'd felt with her. Was that a lie too, part of whatever plan she and Christina had mentioned? I had just stepped into my car, the cold evening air biting at my skin. As I drove down the quiet street, my mind wandered to the strange tension between myself and Christina lately. But then the screech of tires shattered my thoughts. A boy, maybe 17, with wild, disheveled hair darted across the street. I tried to slam on the brakes, but the collision was inevitable. The impact threw me forward, my heart racing. The boy's head had hit the windshield and he was out. Cold panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I quickly dialed emergency services at the hospital. The boy was stable, but needed blood. I, in a haze from the shock of the accident, agreed to donate blood, unaware of the deeper implications afterward. As the nurse cleaned up, the doctor casually mentioned, "You know, you have a really rare blood type. We don't see it often in people." I nodded, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the accident. It wasn't until later at home that I couldn't shake the thought of the doctor's words, "rare blood type." I had always believed that Matthew and I shared the same bloodline. Curious, I researched. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. Matthew had an incompatible blood type. We weren't biologically related. Shaken to my core, my mind raced. I pieced together the fragmented memories, the odd moments of confusion. And that's when I realized I wasn't Matthew's daughter. The next day, I confronted Ruth, my voice trembling with rage and disbelief. I cornered Ruth in the kitchen, my hands shaking with anger and betrayal. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting harsh shadows across her face as she backed against the counter. "You know," I began, my voice low and dangerous, "I've been thinking you were a doctor, a damn good one. So why did you need to fake a paternity test for my mother?" Ruth froze, her coffee cup suspended halfway to her lips. I could see the panic flickering in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to piece it together. "I don't know what you're talking About, she said, but her voice wavered. I pressed on, pretending I knew more than I actually did. You helped Christina cover up my real father, didn't you? But I wonder, was that the only thing you helped her cover up? The cup in her hand trembled slightly. Linda, please, no, I cut her off. No more lies. I know Matthew isn't my biological father. I know my real father was Paul, Matthew's brother. What I don't know is why everyone in my life has conspired to keep this from me. Ruth sat down her cup slowly, deliberately. It's complicated, she said. Echoing her words from weeks before, when our lips had first met. The memory now felt tainted. Poison. Try me. I challenged your mother. She has her reasons, Ruth said carefully. Some things are better left buried. Linda, buried. I repeated the word, hanging ominously between us like my father. Something in Ruth's expression shifted, a flicker of genuine fear, not for herself, I realized, but for me. Be careful, she whispered. You don't know what you're digging into. I stepped closer, crowding her against the counter. Then tell me everything. But Ruth shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I can't. She will. She stopped herself abruptly. She'll what? I pressed. Nothing, Ruth said, composing herself. I need to go. We'll talk later. She slipped past me, grabbed her keys, and was gone before I could stop her. But her reaction had told me everything I needed to know. Christina was at the center of this web of lies, and Ruth was terrified of her. Later that day, I watched from my window as Ruth returned home. She sat in her car for a long time before entering the house, her face drawn and troubled. When she finally came inside, she didn't acknowledge me. Instead, she went straight to the phone and dialed a number I recognized all too well. We need to talk, she said into the receiver, her voice tight. Now, an hour later, Christina's sleek black car pulled into our driveway. I hid in the hallway, listening as the two women faced off in the living room. She knows, Ruth said without preamble. She knows about Paul. Christina's laugh was cold. And so she knows her real daddy wasn't Matthew. Big deal. It's not just that, Ruth insisted. She's asking questions about how he died. A beat of silence. Then what exactly did you tell her? Nothing, Ruth said quickly, but she's smart. Christina, she's figuring things out. Then distract her, Christina snapped. Isn't that what you've been doing? Playing house, playing lover? My stomach clenched at the casual cruelty in her voice. If Linda ever found out the truth, Ruth said slowly, would you take me down with you? Christina's response was cold and different. If it comes down to it, I'll do what I must. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Ruth's world crumbling around her as she realized the woman she had protected all these years would throw her under the bus without hesitation. Get out, Ruth finally said, her voice barely audible. Excuse me. Christina's tone was dangerous. I said get out, Ruth repeated louder this time. I'm done being your puppet, done covering your tracks, done. The sound of heels clicking on hardwood, the front door slamming, then silence broken only by Ruth's quiet sobs. I waited a few minutes before entering the living room. Ruth looked up startled, then resigned when she saw my expression. You heard, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. How much do you know? She asked, wiping tears from her cheeks. Not enough, I replied. But I think you're ready to tell me. Ruth studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, I think I am. Over the next hour, Ruth confessed to her part in the deception, how she had helped Christina falsify paternity tests and medical records to hide the fact that Paul, not Matthew, was my biological father. She claimed she did it out of love for Christina, who was terrified that Matthew would leave her if he knew the truth. But there's more, I pressed, sensing her hesitation. Something about how Paul died. Ruth's face paled. I don't know anything about that, she insisted. He had a heart attack. It was sudden, unexpected. But her eyes told a different story. There was fear there, and guilt. I think you do know, I said gently, and I think you're afraid of Christina because of it. Ruth's shoulders slumped into defeat. I suspected, she whispered. I never knew for certain, but I suspected. Suspected what? That is, death wasn't natural, she said, the words barely audible. Christina was a biochemist. Before she met Matthew, she knew things, dangerous things. My blood ran cold. Are you saying she killed him? Ruth didn't answer directly. Instead, she stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. If you want proof, she said finally, there's only one place to look, where Christina keeps a study in her house, a room she never lets anyone enter. If there's evidence, it would be there. The next day, while Christina was at her weekly spa appointment, Ruth and I sneaked into her house. The study was locked as Ruth had predicted, but the spare key was hidden in an obvious spot beneath a potted plant by the door. The room was meticulously organized, almost staring in its orderliness. Bookshelves lined the walls filled with scientific texts and journals. A large desk dominated the center of the room, its surface clear except for a single framed photograph, Christina and a man I now recognized. As Paul, his arm around her waist, both smiling. Where do we start? I asked, eyeing the numerous drawers and cabinets. Look for anything related to chemicals, Ruth instructed specifically, anything that could induce cardiac arrest. We searched methodically, careful not to disturb anything too noticeably. For nearly an hour we found nothing incriminating. Then Ruth called me over to a small locked drawer in the desk. It needs a key, she said, frustration evident in her voice. I examined the lock, then reached For the picture frame on the desk behind the photo hidden in the frame's backing was a small silver key. "How did you know?" Ruth asked, amazed. "It's where I'd hide a key," I replied simply. The drawer slid open silently, revealing a collection of small vials and a leather-bound journal. Ruth's hands trembled as she lifted one of the vials, examining the faded label. "Potassium chloride," she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "A drug that induces heart attacks while making it look natural." My hands shook as I reached for the journal, flipping through pages of Christina's neat handwriting until a particular entry caught my eye. Dated just days before Paul's death, it detailed an exact dosage calculation and administration method. The final line read, "No trace detectable in standard autopsy." "She didn't just lie about my father," I whispered, horror washing over me. "She killed him," Ruth, horrified, whispered back. "She never told me. I had no idea." But before we could process this revelation, the sound of a car door slamming outside jolted us to attention. Christine was home early. "We need to leave," Ruth hissed, quickly replacing the vial, but I grabbed the journal, slipping it into my bag. "Not without evidence," I insisted. We barely made it out through the back door before Christina entered the house, driving away, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned to Ruth. "We need to set a trap," I said. "Make her confess." That evening Ruth called Christina, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. I sat beside her, recording the conversation on my phone. "I know what you did to Paul," Ruth said without preamble. "I have proof." Christina's laugh was brittle through the speaker. "What are you talking about?" "The potassium chloride." "Christina, the journal." "I know you poisoned him." A long silence. "Then you have no idea what you're talking about. You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" Ruth pressed. "I was there, remember? I helped you cover it up." "You helped me cover up an affair?" Christina hissed. "Nothing more." "Stop lying," Ruth insisted. "I know you killed him because he was going to leave you just like you tried to keep Linda away from Matthew," with stories of abuse that never happened. Another pause, longer this time. When Christina spoke again, her voice had changed, colder, harder. "Fine, yes, I did it. Paul was leaving me, humiliating me. He deserved what he got. A simple solution in his tea, potassium cyanide. By the time they found him, it was untraceable. A heart attack, they said. So clean, so perfect." "And Linda?" Ruth prompted. "Why all the lies about her parentage?" A bitter laugh. "Because she's his. After I killed him, I found out I was pregnant with his child. Can you imagine carrying the spawn of the man who betrayed me? I wanted to get rid of it, but it was too late, so I convinced Matthew it was his. And every day since she was born I've had to look at her and see him, his eyes, his smile, a constant reminder of my mistake." My blood ran cold at her words. The casual cruelty, the utter lack of maternal feeling. All my life I thought there was something wrong with me that made my mother unable to love me. Now I knew the truth. She never saw me. She only saw the ghost of the man she murdered. "You're sick," Ruth said, disgust evident in her voice. "And you're a fool," Christina shot back. "Always have been so desperate for my affection that you do anything, even seduce my daughter." Ruth face paled. "That wasn't." "Please," Christina interrupted. "That was exactly the plan. Break her heart, break her spirit, make her unravel piece by piece. You played your part beautifully, darling." Ruth's eyes met mine, filled with shame and regret, but I already knew the truth. Whatever had started between us as manipulation had become something real, something Christina could never understand. "This conversation is over," Christina said coldly. "And if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll make sure you go down with me. After all, who helped me falsify all those medical records? Who lied to the police about Paul's final days? Your hands aren't clean either." Ruth, the line went dead. Ruth slumped forward, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It didn't start real, but it became real. You have to believe that." I stood, phone in hand, the recording safe. "I know," I said simply, "but right now we need to take this to the police." The next day Christina was arrested for the murder of Paul Wilson. The evidence was irrefutable. The recording, combined with the journal I'd taken and Ruth's testimony, painted a clear picture of premeditated murder. I watched from the courthouse steps as they led her away in handcuffs. She caught my eye as she passed, her lip curling in a final show of contempt. "You should have died in my womb," she hissed. I didn't flinch, though words couldn't hurt me anymore. "Nothing," she said, "could." In the aftermath, Matthew and I grew closer. The truth about my parentage didn't change. How he felt he'd raised me, loved me, been my father in all the ways that mattered. Learning that Paul was my biological father only filled in missing pieces of my identity, explaining traits and mannerisms that had never quite fit with the rest of my family. As for Ruth and me, that was more complicated. The betrayal of discovering our relationship began as part of Christina's twisted plan, cut deep, but beneath the manipulation something genuine had blossomed, something neither of us could deny. 3 months after Christina's arrest, I found Ruth packing her belongings. "Where are you going?" I asked from the doorway of her bedroom. "I thought it would be best," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "A fresh start for both of us. Is that what you want?" She paused, her hands stilling on a folded sweater. "No," she admitted, "but it's what you deserve." I crossed the room, slowly taking the sweater from her hands and setting it aside. "What if I said carefully what I deserve and what I want are two different things?" Ruth finally looked up, hope wearing with guilt in her eyes. "Linda, I helped destroy you. I lied to you for years. I let Christina. You also saved me." I interrupted. "In the end, when it mattered most, you chose the truth. You chose me." I took her hands in mine, feeling their familiar warmth. I'm not saying it will be easy, we have a lot to work through, but I'm willing to try if you are. Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, squeezing my hands. I am. God help me, I am. Outside the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. The future stretched before us, uncertain, but full of possibility. We had both been pawns in Christina's game, but now we were free to write our own story. Stand there with Ruth, I realized that family isn't always about blood, sometimes it's about choice. Choosing to love, choosing to forgive, choosing to begin again, and for the first time in my life I was making that choice for myself.